I'm always trying to figure out ways that, like, little things that I can integrate in my workflow that go beyond just mixing or like beyond just pushing a fader. For example, this rig is totally time coded out and it's set up to where I can literally just set it up every day and it pretty much executes itself. What can I do to make my workflows quicker where I might spend like 2 or 3 days figuring out this process, but in the long run, it's going to save me 2 or 3 days or weeks, at a time.
Michael Keith Lewis, welcome to Churchfront Worship and Tech Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Luke.
Anytime, man. It's great to kind of finally face to face, longtime Instagram follower, and chatted back and forth quite a bit on random things you're doing on tour or on projects. And so it's just great to have you on the show and introduce you to our audience. For those of them who don't know you, why don't you take a quick second and maybe introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, and what you're up to these days.
Okay, well, thanks for the introduction, Luke. So, as you said, my name is Michael. My favorite movie is Interstellar. I feel like that's really important. I have been in Dallas, Texas, the last 10 years. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Malia, who's also in the music world. And we've been married for like 2.5, almost 3 years now. But yeah, I grew up playing piano. I took piano lessons most of my life. And so, like most pianists, I got forced into playing at the church that I was going to. And that kind of like turned into me doing audio things and like helping out and whatnot. And so by the time I was 16, I got hired for that church. And then, yeah. And so I graduated high school, fast forward, went to college, and I started just like taking these little gigs, literally gigs that I found on Craigslist, which sounds so crazy, but it was a different time, totally different time. And I would go and like work for $15 an hour, which in 2015, 2016, that was like insane money in my mind. And so I was like, wow, $15 an hour to go just like push cases around. And that gig would put me in, contact with this other person, and that put me in contact with this other person. And next thing you know, I was like production managing this small venue called Sundown at Granada, which was next door to Granada Theater. And that eventually put me in as production manager at Granada Theater. And I was like also doing sound at Trees in Dallas. If you're in the Dallas area, you know exactly what I'm talking about. While also just doing sound in all the venues. At some point, I was just like looking at all this stuff that I was doing, and I was looking at the classes that I was taking, which I was majoring in music education. So I was like trying to be a choir teacher, which is kind of crazy now in retrospect. And I was like, why am I doing this? So I quit that and told my friends I'm going to try to be like an audio engineer. My friends and my family and everyone that knew me were like, you're crazy. Why would you ever do that? Which to me now is like, I was honestly at that point, I had been doing mixing and engineering to a certain degree for like 4 or 5 years, arguably professionally. So it's funny that they had, any kind of argument against it. But I did that. I said, I'm going to take a semester off. And I never went back. So, yeah, so I did that. I got in contact with some friends. I met this guy named Troy Bruner, who at the time was doing lighting for my favorite band of all time, Colony House. And that was like 2017. And I went and toured with his band, Little Image, for free. Just literally couch surfing, going and doing little small clubs and, pseudo tour managing and mixing for them. We would go and do a show in Nashville in like 2018 or so, and all the Colony House guys came because they knew Troy. And yeah, the rest is history. Coincidentally, their front of house tour manager was on his way out. He wanted to go kind of do other greater things. And yeah, they were like knowing that I was doing that and knowing that their guy was out. They're like, hey, do you want to come like join the circus and maybe like do a little test run as a guitar tech, and just see what the fit is like. And I said, definitely, yeah. And up until that point, this was like me touring was, in that capacity was just totally a joke. I never thought that I would ever get to truly do that. It was kind of a mystery to me to how to get to that point, especially with my literally my favorite band of all time. So I'd always told my friends like, if Colony House, specifically Colony House, ever calls me to do something like that, I would quit everything. I would literally drop. I would quit my PM job and I would leave my church gig, and that happened. And so I called my boss at Granada. I said, "Hey, Mike, I need to quit. Sorry," and I quit my church job the next day. And yeah, and so I did that. Um, and that was 6 years. That was 2019, so that was 6 years ago. And that, of course, like went into other freelance opportunities and grew my network to other artists. I've been out with like Matt Carney. I did earlier this year, and maybe 2 years ago, I did some other work for him. I've done some work for the Aces. I've worked for Jeremy Zucker in the pop world. Done some other tours for Little Image, which was Troy's band. Um, I did Crown the Empire, which is like they're like metal band.
Yeah.
I'm currently out with Dirty Dancing in concert, which is like they play the movie on screen and then they have a live band playing behind it. It's really cool. It's like nothing I've ever done before, but it's like very fun. I'm trying to think of other people I've done. I've done some stuff for Elevation Rhythm. I've done some stuff for like random churches. I just have to. It's to the point now where I have to like look at my own CV to remember it because
Yep.
it happens so fast. You know, you do like 2 months here, and then you move on and you do 2 months there, and it just But I'm just honored and thankful. But yeah, that's like story of my life in the last 10 or so years.
I love it. I'm super intrigued. You said the Dirty Dancing thing is intriguing to me. They're playing the film on the screen. Do they do like a mix minus mix for the live band to come through, or do they remove the audio like the I don't know. How are they working that to have the live band be present?
Yeah, so the way that it works is there's a movie playing on QLab, and it's actually kind of like a little like road dog way that they're doing it. And on QLab there's three tracks that are playing. There's time code, there's a dialogue slash Foley track, and then there's a music track. And it was just music, and then we were like 2 or 3 days in rehearsals, and I was like, we need to stem out that a little more. So there's music left, right, dialogue left, right, which is like also Foley, and then BGVs left, right. Because a lot of the music is like 60s themed, and if you
Yeah.
listen to it, it's very BGV heavy. So you need to be able to like push that in moments. Plus, the singers they really needed to be able to hear that isolated in their ears a lot more than just the tracks themselves. So yeah, and from what I understand, what they did is they like took the original movie and they used some like AI splitters or something like that to kind of like strip out some of that stuff. I don't know if they had access to the masters, so it's definitely not like the most ideal way, and you can kind of tell in some of the moments it's not like the cleanest audio, especially if you've seen the movie. Not to give it away, there's like this scene where they're in the lake and Patrick Swayze's holding the other character. I can't remember her name, but up in the air, and the water sounds with all the like AI stripping, taking all the music out of it. It sounds terrible, but other than that, for the most part, it's good. It sounds fine.
Yeah.
So especially when
What a
you blend the
cool
live band and
Yeah, what a cool unique opportunity just as a mix engineer just to experience that world. I don't that might be the first time I've ever heard of something like that happening. So it's kind of cool that you're in that space kind of figuring out what that looks like, what channels you're working with, what kind of, you know, tools people are using to strip out different parts and yeah, it's cool. I'm intrigued to see kind of your recap after you're done with that leg of the tour and see what your thoughts are and learnings came from.
definitely. I kind of grabbed at it the first chance that I could. I'm in this. You may have heard of me talking about this in like other podcasts or whatever, but I'm in this giant group text called People Who Tour, and it's literally like 32 engineers that are like Nashville, kind of scattered all over the country that are in the industry, and we just kind of throw gigs out there and whatnot. And it popped up, and I was like, that sounds really interesting. Let me just like go see what this is. And I just wanted to stretch myself and like do something that I've never done before because it kind of combines things that I have done with things I haven't. Like I've never really toured theater, but I've done a little bit of theater. I've definitely done some music, and I was, just just trying new things, trying to like learn things and get better. So, I'm happy I did it.
Yeah, very cool. We're gonna glean. I think we're gonna glean a lot just from your experience coming off the road of this one. Such a unique environment. Um, I want to like talk and maybe flesh out. I told Michael before we hit record on this podcast that really there's an opportunity to kind of nerd out with audio, because that's like the water that you swim in is just all things engineering, all things mixing, live audio. I know you've done some studio work, and I found you kind of making content about waves, I think on a Colony House tour. And so I was super intrigued, just like what your story was with that. And so here's my question. How did you cut your teeth in the world of audio? Can you go back to like what you first started? I know you mentioned some of your story, but what was like the first environment that you were sitting around, either a mixer or a studio environment that got you started?
Yeah. So backing up to whenever I first got plugged into my church as a pianist, there was quite literally a Sunday where the youth pastor that was at our church kind of unexpectedly left, and I remember I was playing keys and I needed to hear myself in the monitor or like unmute myself or whatever, and nobody knew how to do it, and I was just like, I need to do this, and so I he was still there, he just wasn't working, and so I went and found him and I was like, hey, so and so, how do I do this? And he's like, oh, you go to this thing, it's called an aux, and you like turn it up. And I said, oh, that's cool. So I remember walking back to the board and like finding on all the rows and rows of knobs and buttons and finding, okay, here's keys and here's the aux and turning up. So that was like my first, I remember that moment in time, that was my first introduction to a mixer. And that was probably seventh grade. So like I was 12 then. And yeah, and so as time went on and I did more and more through like the youth band, that kind of became more and more my responsibility. So there wasn't really a sound person. We would just kind of like set it and forget it. So I would like go up back there, set levels, set ears and stuff, and then go mix. And it became very personal to us because I became like very involved. At some point I was like, man, I realized like, oh, our sound stuff is not good. So then I was like, hey, let's get better sound stuff. And so then I went and I was like, hey, we should buy this and that. And nobody wanted to pay someone to install it. So I kind of like, started talking to people that were better at than myself. And they were like, you should buy this and this is how you should hang it. And I literally like learned from the ground up pretty much how to put in a PA system. And when I say PA system, I'm talking like, a couple powered boxes and some subs. But
Yeah.
I like we had like an analog board from the main sanctuary that wasn't doing anything, and I took that over and brought it to our room. And we had like an old Aviom system that wasn't in use, and I brought it over to our youth room, and I like learned how to integrate that in. And I was like, okay, we don't have any floor boxes in, so let me put floor boxes in and get little Ethernet cables and run those. So I learned how to terminate Ethernet, and I was like, it's crazy. I haven't talked about this in so long, but I was like 16, 17 years old learning how to like terminate Ethernet. So all this is like very applicable to what I do now. And so I got a really big head start. So I did that. And when I was 17, a really close friend of mine who I'm still friends with to this day, he was at another church. And the console that the church that I had first started at with, the church that I was first at, they had got this board called the Roland M480, and it was a very confusing desk. Nobody has this desk anywhere, and there's a reason for it. It's very difficult to use. It's stupid. No, there's a reason that, anyways. So I took it under my belt to like learn it from the ground up. I knew how to patch everything on it. I understood it very, very deeply. I was the only person at my church that knew it. And that's why I kind of ended up getting hired at that first church.
Mm.
So my friend, his church ended up getting this exact same board. And so when they moved to their main sanctuary, he knew that I knew this board. And he's like, hey, do you want to come work for our church? So when I turned 17, I started going working. I got hired at his church, and I did that. And so then I graduated high school, moved to Dallas, went to school there. And by that point, I had kind of like actively been mixing all through this time, all through high school. I had kind of started sinking my teeth into doing recording and stuff like that because I was like with Ryan, the same friend of mine. We had a little band together called The Response. If you want to look it up, it's still, I don't
Come
think I've
on.
ever told anybody this, but we're still on Spotify. It's crazy. It's some of the music, but we like kind of started learning on how to record music, and yeah, we started like recording in our house, and yeah, and through the process of opening a DAW for the first time. And I don't know if you remember the Waves leak that happened where everybody had the V9 for free on their
No.
laptop for, there was like, this is like maybe 2012 or 2013, but everybody had the Waves V9 for a second because it was really easy to get the crack. And so
Wow.
I had like all the Waves plugins when I was, in like 2013. So I had that, and I had Studio One, and I would just go and we would just record stuff and for fun, and I would like mix it. But yeah, that was, 3 or 4 years of that. By the time I went to Dallas to go to school, I felt like I had like a pretty decent understanding of audio, like a really good fundamental head start. Um, yeah, and so I went, and when I moved to the university, I like went and applied and worked for the union there and did a few more years. I worked for the UNT jazz vocalist, which was really cool. There was
Okay.
like it was like a 13 piece vocal jazz ensemble, very unique stuff, like stuff I never thought I'd ever get to do, had no interest in doing when I was like younger. I got to see things I'd never dreamed I'd get to mix. I got to do a lot of jazz because UNT is like a very jazz heavy school. But yeah, so lots of that stuff from the church world though.
Yeah, you have like as I listen to parts of your story, you have this like wide open approach, willingness, kind of call it like yeah, call it like curiosity, where I feel like you're stepping into just areas you want to pursue. You're open to environments that might not be kind of traditional to what you're used to. What is the framework through which you interpret some of those decisions for your own kind of engineering experience and tool belt? Because you could easily probably lock yourself into just being a front of house touring engineer for certain types of music and just lock and load, lather, rinse, repeat. But you're like jumping. I mean, jazz ensembles in college, like you've been a PM for a theater. Like there's these environments that are kind of, I don't know, they're not super similar. So do you have a specific kind of mentality towards projects that you say yes to or environments you walk into?
I think my wife could probably speak more into this than myself, but and then people that know me could probably tell you this. I'm a very like spontaneous and sporadic person, and unfortunately I do projects and I lose interest in them quite quickly. And so, and that, that's not about my friends and my wife, but like I'll like go and I'll do something, and I'll get bored with it. And so I think because of that, when I'm sitting at at a job for like 2 years, I like start to lose interest in it. And so I think that's why the traditional 9 to 5 has never appealed to me. So because of that, I have to like change it up, and I have to do something different and force myself to like learn something. So there's not necessarily like a rigid framework to me, like, okay, I'm gonna try this, try that. It's a I need to like force myself to keep it interesting, and make sure that I'm learning and progressing, because it's like mixing is only so much of the job. There's so much more to the signal flow and like the engineering aspect. There's so much more outside of the what's happening at the console level. And so I don't know, I'm just always trying to just go outside of that, and challenge myself. There's so many great engineers out there that are like, I like to think beyond the board, like Josh Cruz, for instance. He's always thinking beyond the console, and I try to like
Mm.
be like that, and when I match that framework, I don't know, I guess it just kind of happens naturally, I guess.
Tell me
um,
more about that phrase, like beyond the console. What does that mean to you? How are you using that in your your approach?
I try to think, I'm always trying to figure out ways that, like, little things that I can integrate in my workflow that go beyond just mixing, or like beyond just pushing a fader,
Mm.
whether that be using like time code to, I mean, in this case, and I don't want to take full credit for this. The guy that mainly engineered this rig, his name is Graham Tobias. He designed this rig, and I'm pretty much just pressing go on snapshots or just mixing it. I did not design this, but for example, this rig is totally time coded out, and it's set up to where I can literally just set it up every day and it pretty much executes itself. So things like
Wow.
that, to where there's like, things at play where, like the people that are designing rigs like that, where the shows are mixing themselves. I want to think like that, or like the people that are designing these macros where the wireless starts coordinating itself, or things like that. I love thinking like that. Like, what can I do that makes my job easier? What can I do to make my workflows quicker? Where I might spend like 2 or 3 days figuring out this process, but in the long run, it's going to save me 2 or 3 days or weeks, at a time. It's like, I want to think efficiency in the long run. So I don't know if that makes sense. I feel
Yeah,
like that's a
that's
long
super
tangent, but
helpful. Well, and it's important for, I think, for listeners just to remember that the console is just a tool in the tool belt of an engineer who's either producing a show, mixing a service, whatever it might be, and there are other tools you can use in combination to not just be limited to that one, right? So it's
totally.
important to know each one, but it is kind of nice to think outside the box, especially if you've got that creative itch, maybe that more like you more spontaneous personality type, and you're kind of curious diving into some of the different elements. It's cool to hear, and I've seen some of your at least some of the Instagram content. I feel like showed some of the macros, some of the waves integration, and some of the just even smaller, maybe surface level ways that you were deploying some of that strategy is cool to see in the field. If you
Yeah.
can think back maybe to our for our audience, your experience was kind of, I mean, so many of us were in youth group. That's where I got my start, cut my teeth, like in a youth context with students in a church, either mixing with a little analog desk or playing in a band. um, if you were to kind of craft like a curriculum order right now, if you were to go back and be like, I wish I learned these things in this order, do you think that that would be helpful, or do you have a perspective of what that order would be like? Or do you think it's beneficial to just kind of dive in and like scramble to learn it all in that process? Because like you learned terminating cable, early on, which is kind of it's a weird piece to throw in the puzzle when you were also just kind of learning what an aux mix was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It's That's an interesting question. So I feel like my perspective is interesting because I grew up in the church world, and now I'm not really doing much church. I'm like very much not doing a lot of church stuff. And yet I still come in and do these conferences where I'm working with a lot of people that are like volunteering or only doing church stuff. And a lot of these people are they come in on a Sunday morning, and that's pretty much their experience of doing production. They like walk in and they mix on the console that is already there and set up in place. And I think what's amazing is they have these incredible understandings of the board that they're working on, but that's the extent of their knowledge.
Mm,
And I would love to see, I don't know. I think if I were to write a curriculum on anything, I would love to see more like a deeper understanding of what happens before the console, like between the console and the speakers, or the full extent of the production. Because obviously, to have a console turn on, you need like power and things.
mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that is overlooked, specifically in the church world. I don't think, I mean, I think if you went to maybe 9 out of 10 younger church people, I don't think they would really know what three phase is. I don't think they would know what an L2130 is. I don't think they would know what SOCA is. I don't think they would know like a lot of these things that are important. They might not know like how do you actually configure OptiCore? Those things like that are important to actually getting the console running. Now when it comes to coming up with these incredibly creative ways to make your mix sit in the most amazing way and make your snare drum the most insane sounding snare drum, and your vocals the most insane perfect sounding vocals, it would be they could tell you all about that. But on the practical sense of like getting the show up and running, they might not be able to. So I would love to see like more emphasis on that if I were to write some sort of curriculum from the ground up for myself. I would have loved to learn all those things.
Yeah, because I think it provides the foundation that then you can build on with everything else. I mean, it sounds, I don't even know what half the things you just said are. Like my experience is very surface level in that area. So I'm not an expert by any means in that field, but if you have some of that background, it can create much more sturdy of a foundation to then, step into some of those features of a console of where you can create and build a mix. And yeah, that's very interesting because I also find myself wanting more clarity on even just like the audio. um what's a good way to say this, like signal path and audio conversion from preamp, from instrument to preamp to console to speaker kind of situation, like all of the intricacies that happen and what wattage and kind of what the power situation in a building might be, and all of those things are, I'm still learning those elements to it, and I'm finding myself like really excited about it because it allows me to make better informed decisions at the desk. So that's
Yes.
interesting. I'm appreciative of your framework there.
Like in general, I mean, maybe take it, obviously those things that I mentioned may not be as applicable into an installation in a church environment, but like generally maybe the fundamentals are what need to be applied in the church world. Like
Mm,
let's start at, okay, what is wattage? What does that mean in this world? What is SPL? How is that, why is that important in the church world? Like these things, or like why are we looking at SPL? What is our target SPL? I talked about this on the MXU thing that I was on a few months ago, but it is wild to me how many churches I've come and mixed front of house at, and I am not given any kind of target SPL. I'm not given any kind of guidance. I have to ask. I have to be like, like, what do I need to mix to? And or there is nothing at all. They don't have an answer for me. It's like these are very important conversations that need to be have had. It's like they can tell me exactly what the snare drum needs to sound like, but they can't tell me how loud it needs to be. But anyways, there's just very strange emphasis, uh, things that people are focused on sometimes in the church world. But
yeah.
I think like things that I've been thinking about lately, I like take mixing probably way too seriously in myself. Like I get my personality mixed up in it a little bit too much. And like if the show feels like it was a bad mix or whatever, I'm like, oh, I get really bummed. But I try to remember that in reality, that those bad mix days, like maybe 3% of people know that it was a bad mix. I mean, it's insane. It is wild to me. I don't, I can't, I don't want to talk about this situation I was just in, but it's just crazy to me. I mean, I can.
Yeah.
I thought the last show, 2 shows ago, I thought it sounded very bad at the back of the room. And it did. Me and Graham both thought it sounded very bad. And we were talking about it. And it was because of where we were mixing from acoustically, there was just like this megaphone thing happening with the balcony. And that kind of represented about like 25% of the audience. So we really didn't want to hack into the PA because it would just,
Mm,
it would only fix it for 25% of the people. And we were just really having a hard time, and all the management was at where we were at, and we were like, oh, I can't believe this is bad because they're all right here. And we looked over at them, and they're like, oh, it sounds so good, it sounds great, and Graham and I were over here just like, it sounds so bad, how did they not realize? And they go to shows all the time. They represent arguably like that 5% that can tell the difference. So I think it's important for people to realize that you can sit there and fiddle with snare drum EQs for 45 minutes, but the reality is people are more in tune with like the overall blend. Like, can they hear the vocals? And what is the SP? Is it too loud or is it not too loud? Am I
mm.
getting hit in the chest by the kick drum or not? Which, by the way, old people hate. Just so you know, like old people do not like getting hit in the chest by the kick drum. I've learned from mixing Matt Carney.
Yeah. Matt Carney's a good show. It's kind of a good example show. I feel like for some of our listeners too, because it's probably the most church like. Like you're probably not going to get a Colony House esque church mix. Like Colony House, much more rock and roll, much more drive heavy. But Matt Carney is kind of that middle of the road, has some CCM flair to it, but is a little bit more singer songwriter. Am I understanding that correctly? Would you agree with
Yeah,
that sentiment?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I it's funny, I kind of approach some of the songs more like hip hop, if that makes sense, and like John
interesting.
Mayer. Yeah, it's kind of
Okay.
weird. It's like very heavy low end on some of the ones, but it's very it's like very a lot of them are very raw and like stripped, and like the way the drum kit sounds is the way that it feels in the house. It's like very
Hmm.
natural versus Colony House and like, you know, church drums and stuff. It's very overdone, like 80s, just over the
Hmm.
top, just like push the top end, push that. So it's yeah, it's nice. Yeah, I would agree with your sentiment. It is definitely like closer to CCM than anything. Very very singer songwriter, very chill. It's like a quieter show than Colony House for sure. It's like in the 90s, 90 95. I was
Yeah.
very easily able to keep it around 93, and it felt nice to me.
And yet you still have people frustrated that you're getting kick drum in the chest. That's interesting.
I mean, it just depends on the crowd. It's like I definitely I had to figure it out in the first couple shows, but there was like one, I say this, and there was always like on the first show or two, I was mixing with a lot of tilt, and which if you don't know what that means you're just mixing with a lot of low end in the PA. So tilt, like the more tilt you have, the more low end there is in your PA. So sonically, that just it just felt like the subs were cranked, and so I like that. But I had one or two people, show one or two, come up to me and say, "Hey, it's very very bassy, very bassy, very low heavy or whatever." And so I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And so I just took that information. I just started tilting the PA less, or not cranking the kick drum as much. But what's interesting is, Matt definitely likes that. Matt
Hmm.
is he wants the tilt. He wants me to approach it. He, in his words, he wants it to feel like hip hop. So, so it's like an interesting balance of appeasing the artist and appeasing the crowd and finding that happy medium. So Matt's my boss, so I'm going to listen to what he has to say, of
Yep.
course. So
Who's writing the paycheck? I listen to their ears a little bit louder than I do anybody else. That's good.
exactly, exactly. He's
What
singing the songs.
how I wonder too if you can shed some light. I mean, you've got, at least from the outside in, when I watch some of your content, it looks like you're on a myriad of desks, consoles, work environments. Yeah, I think you kind of have, at least maybe on tour, a lot of interaction with the Digico line, but you seem to be pretty uh fluent and or comfortable with any kind of environment desk wise that you go into. And you've spoken a little bit about this to some of your audience in your Q&As, but how do you learn all the different pieces of hardware you're working with? Like, how do you go into a show with knowledge about this desk and the other desk and some of these other pieces of equipment that you might interact with?
I think I'm really lucky on that front in that I just gotten to put a lot of time in. And back to the what we were talking about earlier and setting myself up with the framework to like learn new things, I've tried to force myself to use a new console when I've had the opportunity to make a choice to do that. So the first
Interesting.
chance I got to use Digico on a tour, I was like, please give me Digico so that I can do like a whole 2 months of learning it. And so I did that. um, Unfortunately, it's funny, I honestly haven't really done much outside of one offs. I mean, I've done a lot with SXL, I've done a lot with Digico, I've done a lot with D Live. Outside of that, I really haven't done much more. I've done a lot with LV1. So I say that the only consoles I haven't really toured with is the Rivage stuff and the SSL stuff. So that would be my next, like the next tour I have an opportunity on, I would ask, hey, can we try to do that? So for like Brent, I was pushing to take Rivage out, but we really didn't want to like to change the ecosystem. So yeah, I just try to like force myself to be on a new desk every time I have an opportunity. The other thing that I really try to do, and I like this is I always tell people to try to do this, is I force myself no matter what to start from a totally fresh file 100% of the time, because I feel like
Wow.
if I learn myself, if like I force myself to just build from scratch every time, which is ironic because I like I sell those little flash drives with, these files as
Yeah.
just, which I'm not selling the file, I'm selling the structure of the file,
Yeah.
by the way. But me going through that process of like rebuilding gives me that like refresher, and also gives me a chance to review what I did on the last run and be like, okay, did I like this or did I not like this? Because I'm just like constantly changing my processes, and one tour I might group my kick in and out together, and the other I might not. So, but yeah, that's
What
how.
when you say you start from a fresh file, or you would suggest starting from a fresh file, are you starting with structure in place and you're just building in the nuances of what's going where? Or like you have channel names laid out? Do you have faders where you want them? Or are you changing that every single time, or at least starting fresh, even at position wise? Does that make sense? Does that
It
question make sense?
if it's the same artist, if it's like a 2 month run, I mean, if I'm going into fly dates with this artist after a tour, I will obviously use that same file. But if we're starting on a new tour and we're about to do rehearsals, I will completely blank slate,
Wow.
rename everything, totally fresh. I almost never start over, because a lot of the time, like, I mean, take Matt for instance. It's a totally different band. The last time I'd done shows with him was like 2022, so it's like a different, different keys player, different mics, different. There's just so many different elements that I feel like I spend as much time chasing my old mix and the different processes I had then than it would be for me to just start over. So
Yeah.
that's why I do that, and it's a good refresher to learn the desk.
So I want to piggyback. I mean, I want listeners to hear that, like the mindset of really learning the intricacies of the desk in setting up, that file. One of the biggest challenges we encounter is with like volunteer front of house engineers at churches who probably are not super experienced with mixing. They might just be essentially just a body that can push faders, and sometimes that's what we need at front of house for small to mid-sized churches. But what a lot of what they are talking about, what they're yearning for, and I think you probably see this with your show file sales, is like they want presets for everything. They want a show file that they can just one click load. I want it to be ready and set every weekend, every Sunday. I don't want anything to change. I wonder if you can weigh in, like maybe have a coaching moment mentality for front of house engineers. Like, how would you coach those folks who are leaning on presets for everything, a templated show file for everything, especially in the church world where it is a consistent room most of the time? You're kind of in the same space. PA is probably behaving similarly week to week. There might be like some subtle changes, but band is probably the most rotational thing. Weather is the most rotational thing. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that kind of framework?
Yeah, I feel like my thoughts on this are changing on the week, because the environment is changing so much, especially with companies like AudioLink. I feel like when AudioLink first came out, my knee jerk reaction was like, oh, like why are we outsourcing to remotely mix front of house? But and the more I think about it, I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. Um, but I think my instinct is that we should be teaching, and we should be cultivating within. And so, if that means you have internally somebody that understands like what it means to EQ or whatever, and build a foundation, and then you let your volunteer rip on that file, then that's great. If that means as much as like, hey, let me teach you how it is, what it means to EQ or whatever, or what it means to dynamically do things, and that's great. Personally, I think the more and more I do this, I think that things like equalization and like dynamics, those are very nuanced things, and I don't know. I think that it's very difficult to teach those things. Like, that's not something you learn in an 8 hour session. Those are things that
Right.
take, I mean, years. Like, I mix almost every week for 40 plus hours. I do studio mixing every week, and I do this, and I still am fine tuning my ears. You could play a frequency right now, and I will still not be able to tell you what frequency that is. That's perfect pitch. And I don't have that. And so you can't expect a volunteer to be able to do that who's just on a Sunday once a month. So all that to say, like, I think that I think that having like a baseline that people come in is totally fine, especially when the church world where it's like it is so controlled and your room is like, it's the same room, same PA, generally the same backline. And I think the more of it you can control, like if you can have a house drum set and like have house keys or whatever, then I think that just makes it easier to execute those things. The things that I see often that makes it difficult is when you are changing out a lots of bits and pieces. The thing that I see changed out the most often that I think makes it interesting, that Bethel doesn't do, that I thought was like a learning moment for me, is house acoustics. Bethel has a backlined acoustic that they force you to use. I've been told by the people that I know
Interesting.
there. And most of the churches I go to outside of there do not do that. And I feel like that should be a thing because that's such a important instrument to the like CCM sound. And so I feel like churches should be providing that and like have that in there. Electric guitars, maybe not so much. I mean, that's pretty easy to like just dial on some gain or whatever. And that's such a personal thing. But maybe even keys rigs, like maybe we have like house keys patches or whatever. But it's so dependent on like what area you are in the country and what your talent pool is, or like how many volunteers you can have and stuff. But yeah, I'm so for just having a file that's just like set up and ready to go. I know that's against what I said, but that's a totally, the church
Sure.
and
Different
what's happening there
context.
is like different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been brought
If
in before to just build those files and it works great. It's fine.
Yeah. So if you let me ask you then. I want to dive in. Like if you're building a church file, what are your priorities when you're setting up the desk? And let's say let's say it isn't, maybe it's an LV1. The LV1 Classic is like huge on people's conversation palettes right now. Everybody's talking about it cuz it's a great price point. It's a good desk. People love the Wave system. Now they've got to integrate it into hardware and software. So if you're setting up a LV1 show file, like what are the priorities for you mixing? And let's maybe frame it into a house of worship context or some how would you think through that process?
I think the thing that people really have a hard time with is when you build these presets and like build these templates, people often over time they like lose track of what the gain staging goal is. And so when I go and do these things, I always have a very big conversation of like, hey, this is the goal for gain staging and this is what you need to be doing, and so that the dynamics and all that hit the same downstream. But to make it a little more foolproof, one of the great plugins that I really swear by with Waves is Vocal Writer. And if you put it at the top of the chain, what's nice about it is if you don't end up like, if you have a volunteer or whatever, or you fail to go in there and gain stage, you can at least kind of rely on Vocal Writer to grab it and put it where it needs to be on that day. Which sounds crazy and is kind of lazy, but I love it for that reason. So because of that, everything downstream dynamically kind of like hits the same. So I've almost always, even live, I like start Vocal Writer totally open dynamically top to bottom, kind of have to dial the spill in a little bit, dial the vocal thing in. And then, yeah, I almost always go into like 1176. And then depending on what my feelings are in the moment, I might do, like a 2A, or I might do like an F6, or I might do a C6 in like optical mode. So it's kind of acting as like a 2A, or I don't know. It just depends on any given day of the week and as needed. And sometimes I'll after the vocal writer, I'll go into de-essing before the 1176 because a lot of like really great mixers have told me that they feel like the essing kind of trips up the like FET style compression. And to my ears,
Hmm.
I've never really noticed a difference, but I just trust what people that have been doing this longer than me say. So I like tend to put de-essing at the top of my chain. But yeah, so usually it's vocal writing into some sort of de-essing into some sort of like FET style compression. But yeah, I try to make it to where it's a little more foolproof. And for me, that's like keeping their band in a very tight dynamic window.
Hmm.
Especially the vocals, like that's the big thing that I notice a lot of times. So you go places and the vocals are just like all over the place, and they're just singing here and here, and so I'll tighten that up, and then I'll kind of like work on the rhythm stuff. I know everyone's big thing is drums, and so of course in the worship world, I'll like spend some time on that. A lot of people, they really like focus on soloing out like the kick and snare and all that for hours at a time. I've noticed that with my studio stuff, that if I really listen to like the drums as a whole and I like start with the overheads, I kind of have this thing now where I just kind of individually, I'll listen to each input, listen for resonances, anything that's like odd or weird, clean that up, and then I'll start kind of building the mix with faders, and then just kind of like try to do stuff as minimally, like without being in solo, as minimally as possible.
Hmm.
Then I find that the drum mix comes together a lot easier. I don't know. That's
So
kind of from
so for what you just said, the order you would do an overhead, like you would solo up your overheads for, or you would listen to your overheads first, get a picture of the
yeah.
kit, and then start to dial in the problem frequencies on each input. But you're not soloing those inputs as you go. You're listening to them in the context of the mix itself.
I kind of rush. Like I start with overheads. To like to me, overheads are very very important to the kit. And I think a lot of live engineers, specifically in the church world too, neglect what the overheads are doing, and they
Mm-hmm.
spend so much time listening to what the snare is doing solo and what the kick is doing soloed. And if you just literally, if you like just listen to the kick solo for a minute, make sure that it's not doing anything funky that's obvious. Like sometimes there's some, or whatever, some ringing or
Yeah.
some boxiness that's very obvious. But if you have to spend anything more than like 30, 20, 30 seconds on it, then you maybe just bring up the overheads back in for context and see what the kit's doing. And a lot of times when you bring the overheads in for context, it all the things that you're hearing in isolation kind of like go away and you get the full picture of it. So once I started doing that, I had a lot less trouble like building my drum mixes. So yeah, I do that. I'll like go to overheads, do those same principles of listening and solo, and then I'll go solo kick, solo snare, and then just kind of very quickly use overheads for context, go through. Um, yeah, and yeah, and guitars. It depends on the church and like how good the guitarists are. I find that a lot of times, um, like if you're on helixes and stuff like that, the patches are very over compressed. Like people are just like overdoing it. So I really end up not adding any kind of extra compression. I mean, ask like a lot of people, they just throw compression everywhere, and I try to ask myself like, do I need this? And if the answer is no, then why do I need to do it? And so yeah, so I tend to just like leave things as be. I do the one thing that I do a lot of is saturate, like resaturate stuff, including
Interesting.
guitars.
Mm-hmm.
Same with drums as well. A lot of, again, I go back to like what other people have told me and what other mentors have told me in the studio world. Many great mixers that I've like look up to will tell you that the key to a really great loud mix is little bits of saturation and like soft clipping here and there in stages. And so I'm always just little, here and there I'll add like, a tape on the snare, just tiny bit. Now you might not even be able to hear it if I turn it off and on, but just tiny bits. And over time that just kind of brings the warmth back into it. And every now and then when there's that one snare hit where he like hits the rim or whatever, instead of it just driving a compressor or whatever, it just kind of like clips it a little bit. So
Hmm.
I'll do a little bit of that instead of just over compressing and whatnot. But yeah, I love using saturation on guitars to kind of like add some harmonic stuff into the top end, to kind of brighten or whatever. It just depends on the feeling. Or use the saturation as compression too. That's like another little thing I like doing. If it's already kind of vibing. If we're on amps and stuff, I find that the amps are a little less forgiving with the compression, but tonally it's a little more even, if that makes sense. So like
Totally.
helixes tonally are like all over the place, but they kind of sit in a little more of a window, like from patch, at least on the patch.
Yeah.
Yet patch to patch they kind of go over the place, but within the patch they're like in that. But with an amp, it's like, to me it kind of, I don't know, it seems like dynamically it has more of a window, but the tone is a little more like controlled, if that makes sense. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
that it's like more forgiving. So
Yeah.
I use that information to like make my mixed decisions. And then with bass, I really try not to overdo. I feel like people are really in the worship world. It's insane. I've walked onto files where there's like three bass channels. It's insane. I mean, there's like bass sub and bass mid and bass high. I'm like, dude, it's great. I mean, it's just like if you need to do that, just walk up to your bass player and just ask him to turn a drive on or something like that. It's
Right.
like I don't know. There are some great mixers that do that, and I've go back and forth. I've done the duplicated bass thing, and it does work really well sometimes for some songs, but it's just so dependent. But I find that especially with the volunteers, and if you're like leaving it into the hands of other people, they that kind of freaks them out. And so I tend to, if I'm not mixing it, I tend to leave one channel there for them.
Yeah.
So and I feel like I can achieve like the double bass thing by just using really well conceived multi-band compression and like the right saturation here and there.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, in keys, the other little trick, keyword is saturation. That's the other sleeper thing for me is just adding a little bit of like tape on the piano, not a ton, but just something to kind of like warm up the mid range. Especially if you're on like the Nord stuff. If you're on like Keyscape and all that, I like to leave it as B. But the Nord, a lot of people are on Nord patches, and I'm just like, I don't know, they just need some life in them and just some something to give it some sauce.
Yeah.
So, and I definitely don't be afraid to add more verb than what they're giving you for sure, and
Hmm.
like sonically put it in a space. I feel like that's the big thing, especially in broadcast. Like you have to kind of verb everything out tastefully and creatively, but I definitely add a lot of verb here and there. Um, but yeah,
I'd love for
that's
you to
just
speak. I'd love for you to speak to that the broadcast piece too, because I can't remember where you did it that you kind of you might have done a Q&A on Instagram when you were doing broadcast mixing for somebody either this past year or the year before. It was on a DigiCo desk, I think, and so I think you had a lot, some creative freedom there. But what are you noticing that is maybe some mistakes that are made in broadcast for churches and or even just a live stream mix in general that's like people are missing this and how can we make the biggest improvement in this space?
it. It's I haven't really been diving into the what other churches are doing thing in a minute because it seems like, to be honest with you, a lot of the churches have gotten a lot better, I think,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. I mean, I think at the beginning of 2020 was pretty bad for a minute, but it seems like people kind of got their stuff together a little bit. But I think that the big thing that I really tell people a lot, and this applies to me and applies to everything, it applies to live and applies to studio, applies to broadcast, is listen to your references. I mean, it is insane. It is insane to me how many times people just go and they mix in virtual and they're like, sounds great. And then I walk in and I'm like, it sounds great. Maybe because you've been listening to it for 8 hours and your ears are like totally dead. And then you pull
Mm,
up the original recording and it sounds obviously different because this is not. And it's like if you would have spent 2 seconds listening to that recording 4 hours ago, you would have made miles of progress, and you wouldn't have had to beat your head against the wall. So I would say, whatever it is that you're doing in your broadcast mix, I think anybody can tell the difference. Any mixer volunteer can listen to two pieces of music and tell you that they're different. And so listen to your mix or your whatever it is and compare it to whatever piece of music is the original, since these are probably all covers, and try to identify sonically what makes them different. And if you
mm,
have the time, go as far as throwing them into like Pro Tools or something and pull up something like Plugin Alliance makes this really great plugin called Metric AB, and you can literally
okay.
like go between them really quickly, and you can see sonically what they're doing. You can see the different loudnesses of them. It will do like a loudness match and bring them together. And you can see
Huh.
the differences and stuff. But try to get to the bottom of why they're different, and that will
Mm.
make you better as an engineer, and it will help you figure out what you need to be doing to your mix. So start there with just identifying the problems. I think that's just listen to your references. That is like number one thing in my opinion.
Got it. And you mentioned this earlier, maybe a couple seconds back, but you were talking about um, using Verb in the mix more than what they're giving you, and you said like, use it tastefully, dynamically, musically. What are some of the things that you do in broadcast to come behind that statement?
I I tend to really jump between. I was talking to Corey Edwards about this because he was mixing the Carrie Job and Cody Carnes set at Passion. I was DMing him and trying to get to the bottom
Cool.
of what he was doing. He was talking about how he hopefully I can share this, but he has like 12, I think like 12 different verbs or something that he uses, and he hits like six of them are for vocals or something. So he's like,
Jeez.
yeah, and so I'm not the only guy, but it's not necessarily that he's using six for the vocals at all times. It's that he can quickly go between them and create different vibes or whatever instead of like, let me just take this one verb and go through a million different presets. And I know another guy, Andrew Mari, who mixed all the Colony House record, or the last Colony House record. He like in his Pro Tools template that he starts with, he has just a bunch of different verbs that he can kind of like try different vibes out and see what works.
Hmm.
All that to say, like that's kind of how I approach most of the mixes that I do. I just have a bunch of different like presets or like different auxes that I can throw into really quickly to just try things. And what I usually like to do is try to find kind of a room that matches what um the room sounds like. So if it's a huge arena or whatever, then I want my vocal verb to kind of sound like a huge arena. So I think literally for Salt, I found a preset called like Giant Church or something like that, and like maybe darkened it or something, and it felt for those big massive moments, it felt appropriate. It felt like it was just kind of like pushing the room on the crowds a little. And for the band stuff, it's kind of a similar thing. I mean, I like to, a lot of times, I want just like a little more decay to like make the moments a little more like, I don't know, long and more, for lack of a better term, magical, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I like having that, just like we have those cool like vocal delay throws that we do live. I like to have that just on hand for things like keys and guitars and stuff. I don't use it on every song, but like I'm definitely using snapshots for every song. So there are those really slow songs where there's a guitar lead and the patch that they have is just a little, just a tad bit too dry, or isn't wide enough, and so I'll just throw it into this super ethereal, very modulated delay that I have, and it just opens it up a little bit. And it's nice being able to have that extra degree of control without me having to like go walk all the way to the stage and have that conversation with the guitarist. I mean, I think my job as a mixer, that's the thing. I am the mixer. I'm not the producer. And so
Mm.
I don't personally think it's my job to go up to the guitarist and tell him, "Hey, dude, just so you know, the guitar tone does not translate into the broadcast mix." I mean, their job is to play guitar, my job is to mix. So I take what they give me and I do what I feel like is right for the stream, and
Yep.
hopefully that works.
Yeah.
So yeah, and a lot of time I do things that they may not necessarily be able to do for their patches, or what if they did it for their patch, it would sound weird to them. For example, I might like slightly pan their lead to the left, but then I'll send them into a verb that's slightly to the right. Well, if they did that for themselves, it would sound they wouldn't be able to play.
Oh,
So, those are things that I'm always thinking about and trying. So, and that's a great trick, by the way. If you're on DigiCo, DigiCo has this really great thing where you can reverse link pans. I like by default, all my effects sends now are always stereo and they're always reverse linked. So that way you just kind of, especially if you're live, you just kind of complete the stereo image. No, it's not
oh,
like a hard fast rule, but if you're doing BGVs, if you hard pan your lead vocal here or one of your vocals here, you get that kind of like doubling over here and vice versa.
that is. I mean, I have only ever mixed on an SD9 in college. We got an SD9 as our front of house rig for like our Christian chapel services, and it was at the time I had not mixed on anything besides like a small analog desk in youth group. So I was like, this is like Windows software. It's super confusing. I like just didn't know how to interpret any of it. I was just really grasping at straws. But it was fun to watch the guys kind of learn and cut their teeth on it. And eventually got to mix on it, which was pretty fun. But DigiCo is like it's not a sleeper. It has all those little intricate tricks up its sleeve of like little things that you can do that I feel like every other console manufacturer kind of just copy and paste like what you see on any other mixer, and they all have their flavor and their flair, their preamps and stuff. But DigiCo feels like the wider sandbox of like tricks that you can deploy, especially with the macro stuff. Super fun to dive into and see what some of the people on tour are doing with those desks.
Definitely. Tyler Kirpsek was who's another Instagrammer that talks about mix stuff. He was polling and seeing what people prefer to take out on tour, and everybody was saying Digico, and he was like, I think Ravage is better. And I don't necessarily have a preference on like what console is better, but I do think when it comes to functionality, Digico is kind of king right now. I mean, they do a lot of stuff, and when I get on another desk, I'm like, dang, I really wish that this did this, or that. But again, I've only done a few shows on Ravage, so I might be missing things that I don't, just because I don't understand the full functionality of what that desk does.
Yeah. Man, Michael, this has been a great chat, just kind of deep diving into some of the nerd of audio land. I appreciate you introducing yourself, sharing your story with our audience and some of what you're up to these days on the road. Tell people where they can find you if they want to keep up with you, your handles, things like that. Where can they connect with you online?
I'm pretty much only on Instagram. You can follow me at Michael Keith Lewis. That's Michael Keith Keith Lewis Lewis on Instagram. I'm on TikTok as well, assuming it still exists when you listen to this or it's not banned.
Who knows, man?
Um,
Who
I
knows?
don't I don't I'm not as active there, but you can also email me or whatever. You find me on the interwebs, man.
Yep. I promise you, Michael's a great follow. And one of the things that I think you're lending just to encourage you to keep doing it is the Q&A time. Like if you're on the road or if you're, in between shows and I don't know when you do it, but when you do Q&As on Instagram, the questions that come in are really good. I feel like they're actually well thought through questions most of the time. And your
Yeah.
response is not just a one sentence answer. Like you actually are going in depth sharing your chain lineup for a vocal, you're sharing a rig breakdown, you're sharing frameworks and kind of mental approaches to shows, and so you're really like serving the audience and you're sharing value. So that's something I really appreciate about your channel is you're not just sending out presets or trying to sell a show file or whatever, even though you do sell great show files on thumb drives, so check those out. But you're really lending value in those Q&A sessions. So just encourage you, bro, to keep doing it and to thank you for it. It served me, and I've learned a lot from observing and submitting my own questions there. So thanks for your time today, Michael. It was a great chance to connect in person, virtually, face to face. And I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Yeah, Luke, thanks for having me, man. It's been an honor and a pleasure, man.